Nick, so glad you're here for our next section.
Yes.
Nick.
Ooh, what is? Phony baloney.
I'll see you guys later.
By the way, I watched Mauler's video today on Ahsoka. Great breakdown. I mean, he nailed everything on Filoni, the show. He articulated exactly how I was feeling.
I'm the keeper of the Force, Nick. I'm the keeper of the Force. I know George taught me everything I know,
Well,
and I'm the keeper of the Force.
Have we seen this at all or not? So apparently,
I haven't seen this article.
Right. Well, apparently, there's this Ahsoka featurette thing. You know, Jon Favreau makes the claim that Dave Filoni is George Lucas's apprentice. Right.
That's what John. That's what Dave told John. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So Favreau recalls that George Lucas made a set visit to The Mandalorian, saying George visited the set when we were filming the lightsaber fight in the Japanese garden in season 2. And I think he was really encouraging of Dave stepping up to this role. And so George would turn to Kathy and myself and be proud of Dave, he continued. He was Dave's teacher and Dave was his apprentice. Fucking God.
At that point, he's probably just happy it wasn't J.J. Abrams or KK running the show.
Yeah. So Lucas does not actually make any comments in the short video, but instead Favreau speaks for him. The reason for that is because Lucas probably would never have described Filoni as his apprentice, because back in the early 2000s, whilst discussing The Revenge of the Sith with CNN, Lucas made it abundantly clear there was no one going to take over from him when it came to theatrical releases. So, when asked if he wanted Star Wars to continue after his life, Lucas responded, No. I've worked it out to where when I do it in terms of the films that I'm doing, this will be the last. The next film, 3, will be the last film, and it'll be a 6-part series, and that'll be the end of it. He was then asked if he was mentoring someone to take over for him. Lucas said, No. There may be other venues for it, but not in the theatrical releases, but for sort of offshoot stories and things in other areas, but not in theatrical films. I just want to keep that special. I don't want to have to sort of turn it into Star Trek.
Wow.
So,
keep in mind that he had the choice, right? George is the one that picked Kathleen Kennedy against his better judgment, and we all thought it was a good idea on paper at the time, so don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
He didn't pick Dave Filoni. He could have.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Also, just devil's advocate a little bit on this. Back when he did that interview with CNN back in 2000, I think. Was it?
Yeah.
Dave Filoni was. I don't even know for sure if he was even at Lucasfilm then. I can't remember when he got.
That would have been for
on.
episode 3, I think. So that would have been more like 2004 or 5, somewhere in there.
It was Revenge of the Sith, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So at that time, I think 100% George had no intention of kind of training anybody or, kind of building somebody up like a Dave Filoni to take over creative control. After years and years pass, maybe he was like, all right, I'm going to kind of pour everything I got into this guy here and let him kind of take over, because, he did most all the Clone Wars, working with George on that, and everybody really liked the Clone Wars series. I haven't seen all of it, but yeah, I as far as Filoni being George's apprentice, I don't think George would actually say that. He was probably just like, I was just helping the guy out or whatever.
I think the fact that they're using the term apprentice instead of Padawan is very telling too.
Fuck's sake.
Well, he does strike me as kind of like a little, mealy-mouthed Sith type,
That's what I'm saying,
Now everybody thinks he's the savior of Star Wars, and it's all because there's people that think that culture. But
I think he may be the savior of furries.
Yeah. Yeah, it's he's not, and I got my issues with George Lucas just because of the prequels personally, but yeah, George or Filoni is not anywhere near OT Star Wars trilogy George.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I thought that'd make an interesting section anyway. I don't know enough about it, quite frankly, but I saw that and I was like, yeah, I mean, of all people to sort of line up as your successor, it very clearly wasn't Dave Filoni, because you'd have given him the keys to the castle overall, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have just let him stay in the business if he was going to be I mean, that's basically. You know, you've appointed someone above him that could just fire him, right? There's no prerequisite contracts to state, no, he must stay on. If he was going to be taken over from Star Wars and George Lucas thought he was great, he would have been given the keys to the castle as opposed to a subordinate role, which he could have just been fired from.
Yeah.
So
at the time, I think George would have picked Rick McCollum over Dave Filoni.
Yes.
Well, that's the thing is, I think a lot of people going back at that time thought that was going to be the case, is that Rick would take over for the money side of things and Filoni would take over for the creative side of things. And Rick just bolted. He left. So we don't know what the hell went on there.
And he won't even talk about it.
Nope.
He won't do it. Any interviews. He won't even talk about Star Wars.
I feel that he probably felt burnt by the situation, and George too,
100%.
Because you got to remember how this thing all went down. It's even in Bob's book, so you can't even deny that. He is the one who told us all that. Yeah, George expected them to buy Star Wars, pay for the movies, and they would still have him on as creative, right? And I think that's initially why he picked Kathy and didn't really think about getting somebody creative involved, because at that point, I think he still thought, oh, I'm going to be the one taking care of all this creative stuff and stuff like that. Because at first, then that's probably when Rick was going to be involved. It was going to be him and Rick producing him. And then when he found that out, that's when he chose Kathy, because at that point, he probably panicked. And us and everybody else at that time, we thought, well, that's a good idea. She's worked with George. She's worked with Steven. She's worked with Bob Zemeckis and all these guys. She can get some of these guys on board. Who wouldn't want like a Ron Howard directed Star Wars movie? Makes sense. Come on. She can get these people involved. Okay. On paper, this whole thing makes sense. And then the first thing she does is pick fucking J.J. Abrams. Right. Which even us at first, where we all said it, and let's be fair, when Star Trek 2009 came out, we're like, it wasn't too bad, but the guy'd probably better at making Star Wars than Star Trek by the looks of it.
Plus, he was saying that he was a bigger Star Wars fan than Star Trek fan.
And boy, were we fucking wrong, right? Like,
yeah.
We learned some bad lessons with that. And it is what it is. And I think George feels just as burnt. But I still, at the end of all of this, from everything I've heard from behind the scenes, from everything my gut tells me, George never had planned on Dave Filoni taking over in any creative way, or he would have put him in that position to. And he had the power to do it with the sale, and he didn't. And they supposedly, reportedly, and I know, Nick, you probably know more about this than I do, had already butted heads in the past over characters like Ahsoka and such.
Yep. They did, because Filoni, that was his baby, and he was like, wanted her to have all this bigger role, and George was like, no, she dies.
Well, she causes issues in the original trilogy. If you think about it, it's like, if she is there, then where the fuck is she at during all this shit?
Yeah.
It makes absolutely no sense. Why isn't she helping in Luke's training and all that kind of business? Like, none of it makes sense. And then I guarantee you, somebody brought this up, so I can't take credit for it, but I guarantee you at some point before the end of this Ahsoka show is over, they're going to make that line. He is our last hope. No, there is another. The another will be, who do you think? Ahsoka all along. And that's the excuse as to why they never brought her in the trilogy.
No.
Because if Luke failed, she was their fallback.
You've got a point, you know.
It was never going to
be my fucking words.
Yeah, because if you think about it, in Empire, Yoda tells Obi-Wan after Luke leaves Dagobah, when Obi-Wan says, that boy is our last hope, and he's like, no, there's another. Well, then you fast forward to Jedi, and Yoda is just sitting there talking about how there's another Skywalker, and Luke's like, Yoda said there was another. The other spoke of is your twin sister. Talking about there being another Skywalker. Not that there's another hope out there, so that I could totally see how they could twist that, just like what Tom was saying. And
their argument will be, well, Leia was never trained, so it wasn't her.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing is when George wrote that, Leia was not his sister.
Nope.
When Yoda actually says there is another Skywalker out there that we never got to meet, that we were supposed to meet in the beginning of Return of the Jedi. But when all the shit was hitting the fan with George's personal life and they just needed to get Jedi done, then that shit just went out the window and they just made her the sister. And that story is even dumber because George was just sitting there and I don't remember which documentary this is. I think it's in From Star Wars to Jedi. But he's like, I'm sitting there and I'm stuck in a corner just like Luke, stuck in the corner in the throne room, and I can't get him to fight Vader because there's no reason for him to. So then it dawns on me, I'll just make Leia the sister, and then I'll have Darth threaten the sister, and that'll get him to fight. That is how deep it was, guys. That is the moment George Lucas decided that Luke and Leia were going to be sister and brother.
Right. Oh yeah, I can see him doing. Well, we'll find out tomorrow. We've got to watch Ahsoka tomorrow, and we've got a review on Thursday. So,
Ahsoka's tonight, right?
What? Oh yeah, it's tonight.
9 o'clock
for me,
tonight,
tomorrow.
Oh,
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah, it's released on Wednesdays in the UK anyway.
Oh, dude, I'm gonna spoil it. I'm gonna message you in the morning. I'm gonna spoil it.
There's probably not going to be much to spoil.
You can't spoil us. Okay, yeah, you're right.
Look, I want to be wrong. I want to believe that Dave Filoni is going to come in and somehow, some way, reshape Star Wars in a way that somehow retcons. It's not going to do it.
He's a hateful little urchin.
He was on board for all that shit, guys. That's what you got to remember.
Yeah. He's KK 2.0.
Yeah.
He's a hateful little urchin. He is like a mealy mouthed little piece of turd.